The nursery was too dim, and Maria Jackson was too tired to notice. Her arms ached. Her vision blurred at the edges. Grief had carved her hollow, and the complications from delivery had left her weak enough that standing felt like defiance of gravity itself. When the baby in the bassinet beside her began to cry, a thin, desperate sound that cut through the late-night quiet, she reached for him on instinct alone. She didn't check the tag. The infant latched immediately, and Maria closed her eyes, letting her head fall back against the chair. Just a few minutes. Just enough to soothe him before she returned him and found her own baby. Just enough to stop the crying that was splitting her skull in two. She didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway. She didn't see the door open. By the time she felt the weight of his presence and opened her eyes, it was already too late. The man in the doorway was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her yearly rent. His dark hair was swept back, and his face, sharp-jawed, olive-skinned, devastatingly handsome, was utterly still. But his eyes, deep brown and unblinking, were locked on the baby in her arms. His baby. "Christo," he breathed, the word soft and dangerous. Maria's heart stopped. She looked down at the infant in her arms, then at the bassinet tag she should have read. Mazzi, Dario. I'm so sorry, I didn't. She moved to pull the baby away, but the man crossed the room in 3 strides, his hand raised. "No. Don't." His voice was low, accented, and it wasn't a request. Maria froze. He stared at her, then at his son, and something shifted in his expression. Something ancient and possessive and final. "Do you know what you have done?" he asked quietly. "It was an accident," Maria whispered. "I'm sorry, Al. You have given him your essence. Your body. A part of yourself." He stepped closer, and she could smell his cologne. Dark, expensive, something with bergamot and leather. "In my world, Bella, that bond is stronger than blood. Stronger than marriage. Stronger than any contract signed in ink." Maria's pulse hammered in her throat. "I don't understand. You are his now." His gaze pinned her in place. "And he is yours. Which means, Maria Jackson." He tilted his head, and his lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You are mine." Maria tried to leave the hospital 3 times. The first time, a nurse informed her, apologetically, nervously, that there was an issue with her discharge paperwork. It would just be another hour. Maybe 2. The second time, she made it as far as the elevator before 2 men in dark suits stepped into her path. They didn't speak. They didn't touch her. They simply stood there, hands folded in front of them, and watched her with the empty patience of stone lions guarding a gate. Maria turned around and went back to her room. The third time, she didn't even try. Because Bruno Mazzi was sitting in the chair beside her hospital bed, one ankle crossed over his knee, perfectly relaxed. Perfectly in control. "You've been busy this morning," he said mildly, glancing up from his phone. Maria clutched her baby, her actual baby, Emma, tighter against her chest. "You can't keep me here." "I'm not keeping you anywhere, Kara." He slipped his phone into his jacket pocket and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "But you and I need to talk. And you will not leave this hospital until we do." Her hands trembled. "You have no right. I have every right." His tone didn't change, but the air in the room seemed to thicken. "You nursed my son. You created a bond that my family has honored for 1,000 years. I told you this last night." "That's insane," Maria snapped, and her voice cracked on the last word. "I made a mistake. I was exhausted. I didn't check the tag." "It doesn't mean anything." Bruno studied her for a long moment, and she hated that she couldn't read his expression. Hated that his stillness made her feel like prey. "It means everything," he said finally. "And the sooner you accept that, the safer you will be." "Safer." Maria laughed bitterly. "From what?" "From you. From my enemies." The words hung in the air. Bruno rose to his feet, and Maria instinctively pressed herself back against the pillows. He didn't come closer. He simply stood there, tall and immaculate and utterly immovable. "You know who I am," he said. It wasn't a question. "No." But even as she said it, she remembered the nurses whispering. The way the security guard at the front desk had straightened when Bruno walked past. The way everyone seemed to step aside for him, like he carried gravity in his wake. "Then let me tell you." He buttoned his suit jacket with slow, deliberate movements. "My name is Bruno Mazzi. My family controls shipping, construction, and waste management in New York, New Jersey, and Philadelphia. We are a very old family, Miss Jackson. Very powerful. Very visible." He paused. "And now so are you." Maria's blood turned to ice. "I don't want. What you want is irrelevant." His voice was still calm, still polite, but there was steel beneath it now. "You have been seen with my son. You have been seen with me. There are people who would hurt you simply to hurt me. People who would take you and your daughter and use you as leverage. That's not my problem. It is now." Silence. Maria's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might crack a rib. Emma stirred in her arms, and she rocked her automatically, instinctively, the way she'd done 1,000 times before. Bruno's gaze softened, just slightly, when he looked at the baby. "I need your information," he said quietly. "Your full name. Your address. Your phone number." "No. Maria." The way he said her name, low, patient, like he was calming a spooked animal, made her want to scream. "I am trying to protect you. I don't need your protection. You don't have a choice." He gestured toward the door, and one of the suited men from earlier stepped inside. He didn't look at Maria. He simply stood there, hands clasped, waiting. Bruno pulled a slim leather notebook and a pen from his jacket and held them out to her. "Write it down." "No. Maria. I said no." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. He simply held her gaze, and after a moment, he made the smallest gesture with his free hand. A flick of 2 fingers, nothing more. The man at the door stepped forward. Then another appeared behind him. Maria's breath caught. Bruno's expression didn't change. "I will have this information one way or another. Bella. You can give it to me willingly, or I can have someone retrieve it for me. But I promise you, the first option will be far less invasive." Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped Emma. "You're a monster," she whispered. "Perhaps." Bruno set the notebook and pen on the edge of her bed. "But I am your monster now. And I take care of what is mine." Maria stared at him. At the notebook. At the 2 men standing silent and still by the door. She thought about running. About screaming. About calling for security, for the police, for anyone who might help her. But she already knew the truth. No one here would stop him. Slowly, her hands still trembling, Maria picked up the pen. She wrote her name. Her address. Her phone number. When she finished, Bruno took the notebook and studied it for a moment, then slipped it back into his jacket. "Thank you," he said, and he sounded sincere. Maria looked up at him, and her voice was ice. "This doesn't change anything. It was a mistake. That's all." Bruno smiled. A slow, knowing smile that made her stomach drop. "We will see, cara mia." He turned and walked toward the door, his men parting to let him through. Just before he disappeared into the hallway, he glanced back over his shoulder. "I'll have a car waiting for you when you're discharged. Don't try to refuse it." And then he was gone. Maria sat in the silence, holding her baby, staring at the empty doorway. Her whole body was shaking. And she knew with terrible certainty that her life would never be the same. Maria saw the black Mercedes the moment she turned onto her street. It was parked 3 buildings down from her apartment, idling at the curb like a predator that had all the time in the world. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like sheets of obsidian, and even from half a block away, She could feel the weight of someone's gaze tracking her movement. She hitched Emma higher on her hip and kept walking, her jaw tight, her keys already clenched in her fist. The car didn't move. She climbed the stairs to her third-floor apartment, unlocked the door with shaking hands, and slammed it shut behind her. The deadbolt clicked into place. Then the chain. Then she stood there in the narrow entryway, breathing hard, staring at the peeling paint on the door. He'd found her. Of course he'd found her. She'd given him her address herself, hadn't she? Written it down in his leather notebook like a fool. Maria carried Emma to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see the street below. The Mercedes was still there. She let the curtain fall and pressed her forehead against the cool glass, eyes closed. This was insane. This was all insane. A man she didn't know had decided she belonged to him because of a mistake, and now he was watching her like she was something he owned. Emma fussed, and Maria rocked her automatically, murmuring soothing nonsense until the baby settled against her shoulder. The Mercedes didn't leave. Not that afternoon. Not that evening. When Maria woke up at 2 in the morning to feed Emma, she checked the window again. It was still there. By the third day, Maria stopped closing the curtains. What was the point? He knew where she lived. He knew her schedule, or he would soon enough, because she had no choice but to leave the apartment for groceries, for Emma's pediatrician appointment, for the pharmacy where she picked up her prescriptions. And every single time she stepped outside, the Mercedes was waiting. Sometimes it followed her. Sometimes it simply idled at the curb, a silent black shadow that never came closer but never left. Once, when she took Emma for a walk to the park 6 blocks away, she saw it glide past on the opposite side of the street, slow and deliberate, before disappearing around the corner. She wanted to scream. She wanted to call the police. But what would she even say? A man is following me, but he hasn't threatened me, hasn't touched me, hasn't done anything except exist in my peripheral vision? And if she did call them, what then? How long before Dario Mazzi made that problem disappear with a phone call of his own? It was the 5th day when everything changed. Maria was walking home from the corner store, a bag of diapers in one arm and Emma strapped to her chest in the carrier, when she saw him. Not the car. Him. Dario Mazzi was standing on the sidewalk half a block ahead, hands in the pockets of his long black coat, his breath misting in the cold November air. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at a man across the street, a man in a gray hoodie who'd been walking behind Maria for the last 2 blocks. Maria's steps faltered. The man in the hoodie glanced at Bruno, then at Maria, then turned abruptly and walked the other way. Bruno watched him go. Then and only then did he turn his gaze to Maria. She should have kept walking. Should have ignored him, brushed past him, pretended he didn't exist. Instead, she stopped. Are you following me? Her voice was sharper than she intended. Yes. No hesitation. No apology. Maria's hands tightened on the grocery bag. You can't do this. You can't just stalk me like some kind of... That man, Bruno interrupted quietly, nodding toward the corner where the hoodie had disappeared, has been following you for 3 blocks. He was waiting for you to turn onto a quieter street. The words hit her like cold water. You didn't notice, Bruno continued, his voice still calm, still maddeningly polite. But I did. Maria opened her mouth, closed it. Her heart was pounding again, but this time it wasn't just anger. It was fear. I don't need you to. You do. He stepped closer, and she hated that she didn't step back. Hated that some part of her felt safer now that he was near. You and your daughter are visible now, Maria. I told you this would happen. So what? She snapped. You're just going to follow me everywhere? Watch me every second of every day? If that's what it takes. That's insane. That's protection. She wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him to leave her alone, to let her live her life, to stop treating her like she was his responsibility. But Emma stirred against her chest, and Maria thought about the man in the gray hoodie, and the words died in her throat. Bruno watched her, and something in his expression softened. "How is Dario?" she heard herself ask. The question surprised them both. Bruno blinked, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked almost uncertain. "He is well," he said finally. "He sleeps more now. Eats better." "Good." Silence stretched between them, awkward and strange. "I should go," Maria said. Bruno nodded. He didn't move. She walked past him, her shoulder nearly brushing his arm, and she didn't look back. But when she reached her apartment and glanced out the window, the Mercedes was still there. And this time, she wasn't sure if she was angry about it. Or relieved. The pediatrician's office was crowded. Maria had arrived 15 minutes early for Emma's 2-week checkup, but the waiting room was packed with exhausted parents and fussy children. She signed in at the desk, found a seat in the corner, and tried to ignore the way her back ached and her head throbbed from another sleepless night. Emma was mercifully calm, dozing in her carrier, and Maria closed her eyes for just a moment. When she opened them, Bruno Mazzi was sitting across from her. He had a baby carrier of his own, expensive, Italian leather, nothing like her second-hand fabric one, and inside it, a tiny infant slept peacefully. Dario. It had to be. Maria's heart stopped. Bruno looked up from his phone and met her gaze, and his expression was perfectly maddeningly neutral. "Miss Jackson," he said, as if they'd simply run into each other at a coffee shop. "What a coincidence." Maria's hands tightened on the arms of her chair. "This isn't a coincidence." "No," he agreed easily. "It's not." Her voice dropped to a furious whisper. "You looked up Emma's pediatrician. You made an appointment. You orchestrated this." "I did." He slipped his phone into his jacket pocket and leaned back, one ankle crossed over his knee. "Because you won't answer my calls. You won't meet with me. And we need to talk, Maria." "We have nothing to talk about. We have everything to talk about." His voice was still calm, but there was an edge to it now. "And you will listen, Cara, because your life depends on it." A nurse called a name from the doorway, and a mother with a toddler stood and hurried toward the hall. The noise in the waiting room swallowed the silence between them. Maria leaned forward, her voice tight. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing. This is not a game." Bruno's gaze locked onto hers, and the playfulness vanished. 3 days ago, a man followed you home from the grocery store. 2 days ago, someone took a photograph of you and Emma outside your building. Yesterday, a car I didn't recognize circled your block 4 times. The blood drained from Maria's face. "You're lying." "I'm not." He pulled his phone back out, tapped the screen a few times, and turned it toward her. The photo made her stomach turn. It was her. Leaving her apartment building, Emma strapped to her chest, keys in her hand. The angle was from across the street, zoomed in, grainy but unmistakable. "Who?" Her voice cracked. "Who took that?" "I don't know yet." Bruno's jaw tightened. "But I will find out." Maria stared at the image, her pulse roaring in her ears. "Why would anyone?" "Because of me." He turned the phone back around and pocketed it. "Because you were seen with my son. Because people in my world believe you matter to me now. And that makes you a target, Maria. It makes you leverage." "I don't matter to you," she whispered. "I don't even know you. That's irrelevant." His voice softened, but the intensity didn't fade. "They think you do. And that's enough." Emma stirred in her carrier, letting out a small whimper, and Maria automatically began rocking her. Her hands were shaking. "What do you want from me?" she asked, and she hated how small her voice sounded. "I want you to accept my protection." "I don't need." "You do." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and his gaze pinned her in place. "Do you know who I am, Maria? Truly. You said you control shipping." "I control everything." His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. Shipping, construction, waste management, unions, politicians, judges. My family has had a seat at the table for 3 generations. We are one of the 5 families in New York. Do you understand what that means? She didn't answer. It means I have power. Real power. The kind that makes problems disappear. The kind that keeps people alive. He paused. But it also means I have enemies. Men who would do anything to hurt me. Men who would take you and your daughter and use you as weapons. Maria's throat was tight. Then why don't you just leave me alone? Tell them I'm nothing to you. Because it's too late for that. Bruno's gaze flicked to Dario, sleeping peacefully in his carrier, then back to her. You nursed my son. You created a bond that the old families still honor. And more than that. He hesitated, and for just a moment, something raw flickered across his face. You are a mother. Alone. Vulnerable. And I will not allow you to be hurt because of me. I'm not your responsibility. You are now. Maria Jackson? A nurse stood in the doorway, clipboard in hand. Maria stood automatically, her legs unsteady, and lifted Emma's carrier. Bruno stood as well. Think about what I've said, Bella. She turned to leave, then stopped. If I agree, if I accept your protection, what does that mean? His expression didn't change. It means you and Emma move into my estate. It means you are guarded every moment of every day. It means you give up your independence in exchange for safety. That's insane. That's survival. The nurse called her name again. Impatient now. Maria looked at Bruno, at this man who'd upended her entire life with his presence, his claims, his terrifying certainty. I need time to think, she said. You don't have time. His voice was gentle, but the words were iron. My enemies are already circling. Maria. And when they strike, they won't give you a warning. She didn't answer. She turned and walked toward the nurse, her heart pounding, Emma's small weight solid and warm against her chest. But she could feel Bruno's gaze on her back the entire way. And she knew with sinking certainty that he was right. It happened on a Tuesday. Maria had convinced herself that Bruno was being paranoid. That his enemies were shadows he'd conjured to frighten her into compliance. That she could live her life, raise her daughter, and pretend none of this was real if she just ignored it hard enough. She'd been wrong. She was walking home from the bodega 3 blocks from her apartment, Emma strapped to her chest, a bag of groceries in each hand. The sun was setting, painting the narrow street in shades of amber and gray, and she was thinking about what to make for dinner when the van pulled up beside her. It happened so fast. The side door slid open. 2 men jumped out, broad-shouldered, faces hidden behind dark balaclavas. One grabbed her arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. The other reached for Emma. Maria screamed. She dropped the groceries and twisted violently, slamming her elbow into the first man's throat. He grunted and loosened his grip just enough for her to wrench free. She stumbled backward, arms locked around Emma, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. Get her in the van, one of them snarled, accent thick. Russian maybe. Now! The second man lunged. Maria turned to run. And then the world exploded into violence. A black SUV screeched around the corner, tires smoking, and slammed to a stop between Maria and the van. Doors flew open. Men poured out. Bruno's men, she recognized 2 of them from the hospital, and they moved with brutal mechanical efficiency. The first gunshot cracked through the air like thunder. Maria dropped to the ground, curling her body around Emma, her hands pressed over the baby's ears. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Emma was screaming, and Maria was screaming, and the world was nothing but noise and terror. More gunshots. Shouting in Italian and Russian. The sick, wet sound of something hitting flesh. Then, abruptly, silence. Maria couldn't move. She lay on the cold pavement, trembling, her entire body locked around her daughter. "Miss Jackson." The voice was calm, controlled, impossibly steady. She looked up. One of Bruno's men, the tall one with a scar along his jaw, was standing over her, his hand extended. There was blood on his sleeve. His gun was still in his other hand. "It's over," he said. "You're safe." Maria stared at him. At the bodies sprawled on the pavement behind him. At the van with its doors still open, engine running, driver slumped over the wheel. She couldn't stop shaking. The man helped her to her feet, his grip firm but gentle, and Maria clutched Emma so tightly she was afraid she might hurt her. But Emma was already quieting, her cries fading to exhausted whimpers, and Maria pressed kiss after kiss to her daughter's head. "We need to move," the man said. "More could be coming." Maria nodded numbly. She let him guide her to the SUV, let him open the door, let him help her inside. The interior smelled like leather and gun oil, and there were two more men in the front seats, faces grim, weapons resting across their laps. The SUV pulled away from the curb, leaving the carnage behind. Maria stared out the window, watching her neighborhood blur past, and realized she was crying. They didn't take her home. They took her to Bruno. The estate was in Westchester, hidden behind high stone walls and iron gates that opened silently as they approached. The SUV wound up a long tree-lined drive and stopped in front of a sprawling mansion that looked like it had been transplanted from Tuscany. Cream stone, terracotta roof, arched windows glowing with warm light. Bruno was waiting on the steps. He moved before the SUV had fully stopped, yanking the door open, his eyes wild and searching. "Are you hurt?" His hands framed her face, tilting her head back, checking her for injuries. "Maria. Dimmy. Are you hurt?" She shook her head. Words wouldn't come. His gaze dropped to Emma, and his expression cracked. He reached out and touched the baby's head with a gentleness that made Maria's chest ache. "They tried to take her," Maria whispered. "They tried to. I know." His voice was rough, raw. "I know, Bella. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You were right." The words tumbled out, broken and desperate. "You were right. I can't go back there. I can't." "You won't." Bruno pulled her out of the SUV, one arm around her shoulders, the other steadying Emma's carrier. "You're staying here. Both of you. Where I can protect you." Maria should have argued. Should have fought. Should have demanded her freedom, her independence, her life back. But she just watched men die trying to kidnap her daughter. She just felt hands grabbing at Emma, trying to rip her away. And she knew with cold, terrible certainty that Bruno was the only thing standing between her and that nightmare happening again. "Okay," she whispered. Bruno went still. "Okay. Okay." She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "We'll stay." Something fierce and possessive flashed in his eyes, but his touch remained gentle as he guided her toward the house. "You're safe now," he murmured. "I promise you, Maria. No one will touch you here. No one will take her from you." Maria nodded, too exhausted and too terrified to do anything else. As they crossed the threshold into the massive foyer, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, oil paintings in gilded frames, she realized she was stepping into a cage. A gilded, beautiful, inescapable cage. But Emma was alive. And Maria was alive. And for now that was all that mattered. The room Bruno gave her was larger than her entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked manicured gardens and a fountain that looked like it belonged in a European palace. The bed was massive, draped in silk the color of cream, and there was a separate nursery attached, already outfitted with a crib, a changing table, and more baby supplies than Maria could use in a year. It was beautiful. It was suffocating. Maria lasted 3 days before she tried to leave. She made it as far as the front gates before the guard, polite, apologetic, immovable, informed her that Mr. Mazzi had left strict instructions. No one was to leave the property without his explicit permission. I'm not a prisoner, Maria said, her hands clenched into fists. Of course not, Miss Jackson. The guard's expression didn't change. But for your safety. I don't care about my safety. Her voice cracked. I need to leave. I can't stay here. I'm sorry, miss. I have my orders. Maria turned and walked back to the house, her vision blurring with tears of frustration and rage. She found Bruno in his study, sitting behind a desk made of dark wood that probably cost more than she'd earned in her entire life. He looked up when she entered, and his expression shifted from concentration to something guarded. Maria! Let me leave. Her voice was shaking. Right now. Let me leave. Bruno set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. No. You can't keep me here. I can. And I will. She crossed the room in 3 furious strides and slammed her hands on his desk. I am not your property. I am not your prisoner. You have no right. I have every right. He stood, and the movement was so sudden, so controlled, that Maria took an involuntary step back. You agreed to this, Maria. You agreed to stay here, under my protection. I was terrified. I'd just been attacked. And you'll be attacked again if you leave. His voice was hard now, all the careful politeness stripped away. Do you think the Volkov syndicate has given up? Do you think they'll just forget about you because you want your freedom back? I can't live like this. The words tore out of her, desperate and raw. I can't be locked in this mansion with guards at every door and cameras watching my every move. I can't breathe here, Bruno. I can't. You're alive. His voice dropped to something quieter, something almost gentle. You and Emma are alive. And that is worth any price. Not to me. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Not if it means living in a cage. A gilded cage is still safer than a grave. The words hung between them, brutal and true. Maria sank into the chair across from his desk, her hands covering her face. I just want my life back. I know. Bruno moved around the desk and crouched in front of her, his hands resting lightly on the arms of her chair. But that life is gone, Maria. It ended the moment you nursed my son. The moment my enemies saw you as mine. I'm not yours, she whispered. You are. His voice was firm, but there was something broken underneath it. And I will not lose you. She looked up at him through her tears, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Why? She asked. Why does it matter so much to you? You don't even know me. Bruno was silent for a long moment. Then slowly, he reached out and brushed a tear from her cheek. My wife died 3 years ago, he said quietly. Childbirth. The doctors said there were complications, that there was nothing they could do. But I wasn't there, Maria. I was in a meeting. Closing a deal. Building my empire. His jaw tightened. She died alone, and I will carry that for the rest of my life. Maria's breath hitched. When I saw you with Dario, when I saw you giving him the care, the nourishment, the love that his mother should have given him. His voice broke just slightly. I saw a second chance. For him. For me. And I will not lose that. I will not lose you the way I lost her. Bruno. I know you think I'm a monster. He stood and turned away, his hands braced on the edge of his desk. Perhaps I am. But I am a monster who will keep you safe. Who will keep your daughter safe. Even if you hate me for it. Maria stared at his back, at the rigid line of his shoulders, and something inside her chest cracked open. She thought about the way he'd looked at Emma. The way he touched Dario with such careful gentleness. The way his voice had broken when he talked about his wife. I don't hate you, she said quietly. He turned, surprise flickering across his face. I don't hate you, she repeated. But I can't live like this, Bruno. I can't be a prisoner in a beautiful house. I need something. Some piece of myself that's still mine. He studied her for a long moment. What do you need? Freedom to walk the grounds. Without guards following me. Time alone with Emma. A phone I can use to call people. She swallowed. Some proof that I'm still a person, not just something you're protecting. Bruno was silent. Then finally he nodded. You can walk the grounds during the day. Alone. But you stay within the walls. His voice was firm. You can have a phone. But it will be monitored for your safety. And you will have time with Emma. As much as you need. It wasn't freedom. But it was something. Maria stood, her legs unsteady, and nodded. Okay. Okay. They stared at each other across the study, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Maria thought she saw something human in Bruno Mazzi's eyes. Something grieving. Something desperate. Something that looked almost like hope. Maria found Bruno in the nursery at 2 in the morning. She'd been walking the hallways, unable to sleep, Emma finally peaceful in her crib for the first time in hours. The estate was quiet, shadowed, and she'd followed the sound of soft humming to the room next to hers. Bruno was sitting in the rocking chair by the window, Dario cradled against his chest, and he was singing. The words were Italian, low and melodic, and his voice was surprisingly gentle. Maria stood in the doorway, frozen, watching this powerful, dangerous man rock his infant son with a tenderness that made her chest ache. He looked up and saw her. The singing stopped. I'm sorry, Maria whispered. I didn't mean to interrupt. You're not. Bruno shifted Dario slightly, and the baby made a small, contented sound. He doesn't sleep well. Neither do I. Maria stepped into the room, drawn by something she couldn't name. What were you singing? An old lullaby. My mother used to sing it to me. He looked down at Dario, and his expression was so raw it hurt to witness. I sang it to my wife when she was pregnant. I thought. His voice caught. I thought I would sing it to them both. Maria sank into the chair across from him. What was her name? Isabella. The name came out like a prayer. She was. He stopped searching for words. She was everything I wasn't. Soft where I was hard. Kind where I was ruthless. She believed I could be better than what this life made me. Did you love her? More than anything. Bruno's thumb traced gentle circles on Dario's back. We grew up together. Families arranged the marriage, but it became real. She knew what I was, what I did, and she loved me anyway. He paused. Or she tried to. Maria's throat tightened. I'm sorry you lost her. I didn't just lose her, Maria. I killed her. The words were flat. Brutal. I chose a meeting over being with her. I chose business over my wife and my unborn son. And when the complications started, when she needed me, his jaw clenched. I wasn't there. That's not your fault. Isn't it? He looked at her and his eyes were haunted. I built this empire. I made enemies. I put a target on her back just by loving her. And when she needed me most, I was negotiating shipping routes. Maria didn't know what to say. She thought about her own losses, her own grief, and the words came before she could stop them. Emma's father left when I told him I was pregnant. Bruno's gaze sharpened. We'd been together 2 years. I thought, she laughed bitterly. I thought he loved me. But when I showed him the test, he was gone within a week. Blocked my number. Moved to another state. I haven't heard from him since. He's a fool. Maybe. Or maybe he just didn't want to be tied down to someone like me. Maria wrapped her arms around herself. I was a waitress. No family, no money, no prospects. I could barely take care of myself, and suddenly I was supposed to raise a child. But you did. I had to. Her voice cracked. I worked 2 jobs until I was 8 months pregnant. I delivered Emma alone because I couldn't afford anyone to be there with me. And 3 days after we came home, my landlord raised the rent, and I realized I couldn't. She stopped, swallowing hard. I couldn't do it. I couldn't give her the life she deserved. Bruno was silent, but she could feel the weight of his attention. I was so tired, Maria whispered. So tired and so alone and so terrified that I was going to fail her. That's why I didn't check the tag that night. That's why I fed Dario. Because I was too broken to do the one thing I was supposed to do. Take care of my own child. You were exhausted, not broken. I felt broken. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I still feel broken. Bruno stood slowly, carefully settling Dario into his crib before crossing to where Maria sat. He knelt in front of her, the same way he had in his study, and his hands covered hers. You are not broken, Bella, he said quietly. You are a mother who survived impossible circumstances. You are a woman who kept fighting when everyone else abandoned you. And you are stronger than you know. Maria looked at him through her tears. How can you say that? You barely know me. I know enough. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. I know you would have fought those men to protect Emma. I know you grieve for the life you lost but keep moving forward anyway. I know you're afraid, but you're here. You're still here. Something in her chest broke open. I'm so tired of being strong, she whispered. Then let me be strong for you. Bruno's voice was rough, urgent. Let me carry this, Maria. Let me protect you and Emma the way I couldn't protect Isabella. Let me. He stopped, his jaw working. Let me have this second chance. Maria stared at him. At this man who terrified her and confused her and made her feel things she didn't understand. I don't know how to do this, she said. Neither do I. His lips curved into something almost like a smile. But we'll figure it out. Together. The word hung between them, together. And Maria realized that somewhere in the chaos and fear and grief, something had shifted. She wasn't just his prisoner. He wasn't just her captor. They were two broken people, bound by circumstance and loss, trying to survive in a world that wanted to destroy them. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The argument started over something small. Maria had asked to visit a pharmacy to pick up a prescription. Bruno had said no. And suddenly, 2 weeks of simmering tension exploded into something neither of them could control. I'm not asking for permission, Maria said, her voice tight as she stood in the doorway of Bruno's study. I'm telling you. I need to go to the pharmacy. Today. Bruno didn't look up from the paperwork spread across his desk. One of my men will pick it up for you. I don't want one of your men to pick it up. I want to go myself. No. You can't just say no. I can. He set down his pen and finally looked at her. And I am. Maria's hands clenched into fists. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You control everything. Where I go, who I see, what I do. I can't even buy my own medication without your permission. It's not about permission. It's about safety. It's about control. She stepped into the room, and there was something wild in her eyes now, something desperate. You say you're protecting me, but all you're doing is suffocating me. I can't live like this, Bruno. I can't be your possession. You're not my possession. His voice was dangerously quiet. Then what am I? The question came out raw, broken. What am I to you, Bruno? Your responsibility? Your second chance? Your replacement for the wife you couldn't save? He stood so fast his chair scraped against the floor. Don't. Why not? Maria moved closer, and she could feel the anger and frustration and confusion of the past 2 weeks boiling over. Why can't I say it? It's true, isn't it? You look at me and you see her. You look at Emma and Dario and you see the family you lost. Stop. And you think if you just control everything, if you just keep me locked up here like some kind of prize, you can fix what went wrong. I said stop. Bruno rounded the desk in 2 strides, and suddenly he was right there, towering over her, his eyes blazing. You don't know what you're talking about. Then tell me. Maria tilted her chin up, refusing to back down. Tell me why you're doing this. Tell me why you can't just let me go. Because I can't. The words tore out of him, ragged and desperate. Because the thought of you out there, vulnerable, unprotected, it makes me insane, Maria. Because I see your face when I close my eyes and I think about what could happen to you and I. He stopped, his jaw clenched so tight she thought it might crack. You what? She whispered. I can't lose you. His voice broke. I can't lose someone else He didn't finish the sentence. But Maria heard it anyway. The air between them changed. Charged. Electric. Bruno, she breathed. And then his hands were in her hair and his mouth was on hers and the world disappeared into heat and hunger and something that felt like falling. Maria gasped against his lips, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer even as her mind screamed that this was wrong, this was dangerous, this was everything she shouldn't want. But God, she wanted it. He kissed her like he was drowning and she was air. Like he'd been starving and she was sustenance. His hands cradled her face with a gentleness that contradicted the desperation in his kiss, and Maria felt something inside her shatter and reform all at once. She kissed him back. She shouldn't have. She should have pushed him away, should have run, should have remembered all the reasons this was impossible. But his lips were warm and demanding, and when he groaned low in his throat, the sound sent heat straight through her core. Bruno's hand slid from her face to her waist, pulling her flush against him, and Maria could feel the hard planes of his body, the thundering of his heart, the barely leashed control that was unraveling with every passing second. And then, abruptly, he pulled away. They stood there, breathing hard, staring at each other. Bruno's hair was disheveled where her fingers had tangled in it. His lips were kiss-swollen. His eyes were wild, dark with desire and confusion and something that looked almost like fear. I shouldn't have. His voice was hoarse. Maria, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. She touched her lips, still tingling, still aching for more. Why did you? Because I'm a selfish bastard who takes what he wants. He turned away from her, his hands braced on the desk. And because you were right. About everything. Bruno. You should go. The words were clipped, controlled. Before I do something else I'll regret. Maria stared at his back, at the rigid line of his shoulders, and she knew she should leave. Should walk away and pretend this never happened. But her feet wouldn't move. What if I don't want you to regret it? The words slipped out before she could stop them. Bruno went absolutely still. What if I? Maria swallowed hard. What if I wanted it too? He turned slowly, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. Heat. Hunger. Hope. Don't say that unless you mean it, Bella. His voice was rough, barely controlled. Don't say that unless you understand what it means. What does it mean? It means you're mine. He crossed back to her, and this time there was no hesitation. Not because of some ancient bond. Not because I'm protecting you. But because I want you. Because I can't stop thinking about you. Because every time I see you with Emma, every time you smile at Dario, every time you look at me like I'm not a monster. He stopped, his forehead resting against hers. It means I'm falling for you, Maria. And I don't know how to stop. Maria's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I don't know how to want someone who terrifies me. Then don't. His breath ghosted across her lips. Walk away. Right now. And I'll never touch you again. She should have. But instead, she stayed. Maria knew something was wrong the moment she saw Bruno's face. He'd been in meetings all day, the kind that made the guards stand straighter, made the staff whisper nervously in Italian. She'd stayed in her room with Emma and Dario, both babies napping peacefully, but the tension in the estate was palpable. When Bruno finally appeared in the doorway just after sunset, his expression was carved from stone. I need to go out tonight, he said, his voice carefully neutral. There's a meeting. With Volkov. Maria's blood went cold.
The man who sent those men after me?
His boss.
Alexei Volkov.
Bruno's jaw tightened. He's requested a sit-down. Neutral ground. To discuss terms. What kind of terms?
The kind that might end this without more bloodshed.
But the look in his eyes said he didn't believe it. Maria stood, her heart racing.
Don't go. I have to. Bruno. This is the only way to end it, Maria.
He crossed to her, his hands framing her face. I'll have 20 men with me. Volkov will have the same. It's just talk. But Maria saw the gun tucked into the back of his waistband. Saw the way his men were already waiting downstairs, armed and silent. Come back to me, she whispered. Something fierce flashed in his eyes. He kissed her, hard and desperate, and then he was gone. The hours that followed were torture. Maria paced. Fed the babies. Paced some more. Every creak of the house made her jump. Every shadow felt like a threat. It was past midnight when she heard the cars return. She ran to the window and saw the SUVs pulling up to the front of the estate. Too fast, tires screeching. Men poured out, shouting in Italian, and Maria's heart stopped when she saw them carrying someone. Bruno! She flew down the stairs, barefoot, her nightgown tangling around her legs. The front door was already open, and they were bringing him into the foyer, alive, walking, but his shirt was soaked with blood. Dio, one of the men was saying. We need a doctor. I'm fine. Bruno's voice was rough, strained. It's not my blood. Maria stopped at the bottom of the stairs, her hand pressed to her mouth. Bruno looked up and saw her. His face was splattered with red. His knuckles were split and bleeding. And his eyes. His eyes were dark and wild and utterly empty. Get her out of here, he said to one of his men. No. Maria moved forward. What happened? Maria. What happened? Her voice cracked. Bruno stared at her. Then slowly, he dismissed his men with a sharp gesture. They hesitated, then retreated, leaving them alone in the blood-spattered foyer. Volkov didn't want to negotiate, Bruno said finally. He wanted to make a point. What kind of point? He showed me photographs. Bruno's voice was flat, mechanical. Of you. Of Emma. Of Dario. He told me exactly what he would do to each of you if I didn't step aside and let him take over my territory. Maria felt the blood drain from her face. He described it, Bruno continued, and now there was something shaking beneath the control. In detail. What his men would do to you. How long they would make it last. How he would send me pieces. Stop. Maria's voice was barely a whisper. I couldn't stop. Bruno's hands clenched into fists. I couldn't stop seeing it. Couldn't stop hearing his voice. And I. He stopped, his jaw working. I killed him, Maria. Right there. In front of everyone. I put my hands around his throat and I squeezed until he stopped breathing. The words hung in the air. Maria should have been horrified. Should have been disgusted. Should have run. But all she could think about was Emma sleeping upstairs. About the photographs Volkov had shown him. About the threats he'd made. Good, she said. Bruno's eyes widened. Good, Maria repeated, and her voice was steady now. He threatened our children. He threatened me. And you stopped him. I murdered him. You protected us. She closed the distance between them, her hands reaching for his blood-stained face. You did what you had to do. Maria, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. She looked into his eyes, and she saw the fear there, the certainty that she would reject him now, that she would see the monster he believed himself to be. You think I'm going to run. You think I'm going to be afraid of you. You should be. I'm not. She pulled his head down until their foreheads touched. I'm not afraid of you, Bruno. I'm afraid of a world where men like Volkov exist. I'm afraid of losing Emma.
I'm afraid of losing you.
His breath caught.
You can't. I love you.
The words came out fierce and certain.
I love you, and I'm not going anywhere.
Bruno made a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh, and then his arms were around her, crushing her against him. He was shaking, this powerful, dangerous man, trembling in her arms like he might break apart.
I love you, he said against her hair. Ti amo, mia bella. Ti amo.
Maria pulled back just enough to kiss him, and this time there was no hesitation, no fear, no doubt. Only certainty. Only them. Bruno lifted her into his arms and carried her upstairs, and Maria knew that this was her choice. Not forced by circumstance or fear or protection. This was her choosing him. Choosing this dangerous, violent, beautiful life. Choosing love in the midst of blood and chaos. And when they finally came together, skin against skin, breath mingling with whispered confessions and desperate promises, Maria understood that she had never been his prisoner. She had always been his salvation. Just as he was hers. The room was full of dangerous men. Maria could feel their eyes on her as she descended the grand staircase, Bruno's hand firm and steady at the small of her back. The estate's formal dining room had been transformed. Long tables arranged in a U-shape, every seat occupied by men in expensive suits with hard eyes and calculating expressions. The commission. The heads of the 5 families. The most powerful men in New York's underworld. And they were all here to meet her.
Breathe, Bella, Bruno murmured against her ear. They're just men.
Men who could kill me with a phone call, Maria whispered back.
Men who answer to me.
His hand tightened possessively on her waist. And who will show you the respect you deserve. They reached the head of the table, and Bruno didn't sit. Instead he stood tall, commanding, every inch the capo dei capi, and the room fell silent. Gentlemen, Bruno's voice carried effortlessly through the space. Thank you for accepting my invitation. I've called you here tonight to make an introduction. And a declaration. Maria's heart hammered against her ribs. Bruno turned to her, and the fierce pride in his eyes made her breath catch. This is Maria Jackson. Some of you may have heard whispers about her. Let me make the truth clear. He faced the room again. Maria is under my protection. She is the mother to my son Dario, bound to him by the old ways, by the bond of shared essence that our ancestors honored for 1,000 years. Murmurs rippled through the room. More than that, Bruno continued, his voice hardening. She is mine. My woman. My family. And anyone who threatens her, who even looks at her wrong, will answer to me personally. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Alexei Volkov learned this lesson. He will not be the last if anyone here forgets it. The room was utterly silent. Then slowly one of the older men, Don Castellano, Maria recognized from Bruno's descriptions, stood and raised his glass. To Maria Jackson, he said, his voice gravelly with age and authority. La Donna del Capo. May she be blessed with long life and strong sons. One by one, the others stood, raised their glasses, acknowledged her. Maria's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. Bruno pulled out her chair, and she sat beside him as the dinner began. Throughout the meal, men approached to pay their respects, to offer congratulations, to pledge their family support. It was overwhelming and terrifying and somehow, impossibly real. She was no longer just Maria Jackson, single mother, struggling to survive. She was Maria Jackson, the woman who belonged to Bruno Mazzi. And in this world that meant everything. Later, after the guests had left and the staff had cleared away the evidence of the gathering, Bruno found her on the terrace overlooking the gardens. You were magnificent tonight, he said, joining her at the railing. I was terrified. You didn't show it. He turned to face her fully. You held your head high. You met their eyes. You showed them the strength I already knew you possessed. Maria managed a smile. I learned from the best. No, Bella. Bruno's expression softened.
You were always strong. I just gave you a reason to show it. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Maria's breath caught. I know this life isn't what you chose, Bruno said quietly, opening the box to reveal a ring that stole her breath. It was antique, exquisite, a large emerald surrounded by diamonds, set in gold that looked like it had been crafted centuries ago. I know I took your freedom, your choices, your old life. And I will carry that guilt for the rest of my days. Bruno. But I can give you this. He took the ring from the box, his hand steady despite the emotion in his eyes. This ring belonged to my great-great-grandmother. She wore it when she married into the Mazzi family, when she chose this life knowing all the dangers it would bring. It's been passed down through generations, from capo to capo, to the women strong enough to stand beside them. He knelt. Maria's vision blurred with tears. Maria Jackson, Bruno said, his voice rough with emotion. You are the strongest woman I have ever known. You survived poverty and abandonment. You protected your daughter against impossible odds. You looked at the worst parts of me and chose to love me anyway. His jaw tightened. I don't deserve you. I will never deserve you. But I am asking you, Bella. Will you marry me? Will you stand beside me, not as my possession, not as my obligation, but as my partner? My equal? My wife? Maria looked down at this man. This powerful, dangerous, gentle man who had turned her world upside down and somehow made her feel safer than she'd ever felt before. Yes, she whispered. Bruno's eyes closed for just a moment, as if in prayer. Then he slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, like it had been waiting for her all along, and stood, pulling her into his arms. Ti amo, he murmured against her hair. Per sempre. Forever. Ti amo, Maria echoed, the Italian words feeling right on her tongue. Forever. They stood there on the terrace, wrapped in each other, as the moon rose over the Mazzi estate. Maria thought about the exhausted, broken woman she'd been 2 months ago. The woman who'd accidentally fed the wrong baby and set this entire impossible story in motion. She thought about how much she'd lost. Her freedom. Her independence. Her old life. But she'd gained so much more. A man who loved her fiercely. A son in Dario, who she'd already come to love as her own. A family, forged in blood and chaos and unexpected grace. A future that was dangerous and complicated and absolutely worth fighting for. What are you thinking? Bruno asked softly. Maria looked up at him, at this man who'd claimed her, protected her, loved her, and she smiled. I'm thinking that sometimes the biggest mistakes, she said, lead to the most beautiful destinies. Bruno kissed her then, deep and slow and full of promise. And Maria Jackson, soon to be Maria Mazzi, kissed him back, embracing her new life with both hands and an open heart. The gilded cage had become a kingdom. And she was ready to rule. Maria's story reminds us that our darkest moments can become doorways to unexpected blessings. When life pushes you into impossible situations, when exhaustion makes you stumble, when mistakes threaten to define you. Remember that redemption often wears a surprising face. Like Maria, you might find yourself in circumstances you never chose, facing dangers you never imagined. But strength isn't about avoiding the fall. It's about rising afterward, making bold choices, and refusing to let fear steal your future. Sometimes the wrong turn leads you exactly where you need to be. Sometimes the mistake becomes the miracle. Sometimes the cage transforms into a kingdom when you're brave enough to claim it. If this story moved you, touched your heart, or reminded you of your own resilience, I'd love to hear from you. Drop your favorite moment in the comments below. Was it the hospital confrontation, the ambush, the moment Maria chose love over fear? Let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this story with someone who needs to hear that even our most vulnerable mistakes can lead to our most powerful transformations. Your destiny is waiting. Sometimes you just have to be brave enough to reach for it.